A wild stallion stood alone in the desert pasture, his black coat shimmering like obsidian under the Arizona sun. For 6 straight weeks, he'd been impossible to approach. 3 experienced horse handlers had already been injured trying to get near him. The ranch owner had run out of options and was about to make the hardest call of his life. Then a quiet 10-year-old boy walked up to the fence and said 5 words that changed everything: "He's not angry. He's grieving." Harrison Mitchell had owned this land for over 30 years. He'd seen wild horses, broken horses, and everything in between. But nothing prepared him for what was happening in his west pasture. The Mustang had appeared out of nowhere 3 weeks earlier, and from day one, he'd been a storm of fury. Charging anyone who came close. Destroying sections of fence. Terrifying the other horses so badly they huddled together at the far end of the property, refusing to come near him. Harrison had tried everything. Professional trainers couldn't touch him. Veterinarians wouldn't get within throwing distance. Animal control had been called twice, and both times they'd left empty-handed, saying the horse was too dangerous to handle. The final option was already scheduled: euthanasia, set for Friday morning. Harrison hated the thought, but what choice did he have? He couldn't risk his staff getting hurt. He couldn't let his other animals live in constant fear. That Tuesday afternoon, a new housekeeper arrived at the ranch with a small boy in tow. The woman, Mrs. Lacey, was in her 70s, kind-faced and soft-spoken. She explained she was caring for her young ward temporarily while searching for a more permanent arrangement for him. The boy's name was Luke. He was small for his age, with dark hair and darker eyes that seemed to hold secrets too heavy for someone so young. Luke didn't say much during the introductions. He nodded politely when spoken to, thanked Harrison for allowing them to stay, and then asked if he could look around the ranch. Harrison told him to feel free, but warned him to stay away from the west pasture where the dangerous horse was kept separated from the others. Less than an hour later, Harrison glanced out his window and felt his blood run cold. Luke was standing right at the fence line of the west pasture. The boy's small hands were wrapped around the wooden rails, and he was staring directly at the stallion. Harrison rushed outside, shouting for Luke to step back. But as he got closer, he noticed something that stopped him dead in his tracks. The horse wasn't charging. He wasn't even pacing. He was standing completely still, about 20 feet from the fence, staring back at Luke with an intensity that was somehow different from the aggression Harrison had witnessed before. "Son, you need to move away from there right now," Harrison called out, trying to keep his voice steady. "That animal is extremely dangerous." Luke turned his head slightly but didn't move away from the fence. "No sir, he's not dangerous. He's protecting something. Or maybe remembering something he lost." The words hit Harrison like a physical blow. There was something about the way Luke spoke, not like a child guessing, but like someone who understood pain from the inside out. "How could you possibly know that?" Harrison asked, stepping closer but keeping himself between Luke and the fence. Luke looked back at the stallion. "Because that's exactly how I'd act if someone tried to take me away from the last place I had with the people I loved." Mrs. Lacey had appeared on the porch, worry creasing her face. Harrison called out to her. "How long has this boy been with you?" 6 months, she replied, making her way down the steps. "He's been through more than any child should have to bear." Harrison studied Luke more carefully. There was something familiar about the boy's profile, something that tugged at a memory he couldn't quite place. "What happened to him?" Mrs. Lacey's voice dropped. "Car accident. Last winter. Both parents killed instantly. Luke was in the hospital for months. When he finally recovered, there was no family left to take him." Harrison felt the ground shift beneath him. No wonder the boy recognized grief when he saw it. "Where did he live before?" Harrison asked. "Before the accident?" "Northern Nevada," Mrs. Lacey said. "His father worked with wild mustangs. Had some kind of research sanctuary up there." The word struck Harrison like lightning. Northern Nevada. Wild horses. A memory surfaced from 15 years ago, a young man named David Chapman who'd worked at this very ranch for one summer. David had been passionate, skilled, and absolutely devoted to wild horse conservation. He'd left to start his own sanctuary in Nevada. Mrs. Lacey, Harrison said carefully, was the boy's father named David Chapman? She looked surprised. Yes. Did you know him? Harrison gripped the fence post to steady himself. I did. He worked here once, a long time ago. That evening, after Luke had reluctantly come inside for dinner, Harrison sat alone on his porch wrestling with ghosts. David Chapman had worked at this ranch during the worst period of Harrison's life. It was 2 years after Harrison's wife had died, and his 16-year-old daughter Claire was drowning in anger and grief. She'd hated the move from the city to this remote desert ranch. Hated her father for uprooting her life. Hated everything except the horses. David had been 22 then, hired to help with a group of rescued Mustangs. Claire had been drawn to him immediately, to his gentleness, his passion, his complete understanding of these wild creatures. Harrison had watched his daughter come alive again in a way she hadn't since her mother's death. But Harrison had also seen something else developing. His teenage daughter and this young horse trainer were falling for each other. And that had terrified him. When he discovered them meeting in secret, Harrison had exploded. He'd accused David of taking advantage of Claire. Threatened him with legal action. Fired him on the spot and ordered him off the property that same night. Claire had been devastated. She'd screamed that Harrison had destroyed the only good thing in her life. 3 days later, she'd vanished, leaving only a note saying she was going to find David and that Harrison would never see her again. If this story is stirring something in your heart, please share it with someone who needs to hear it. Sometimes the most powerful healing happens when we realize we're not alone in our pain. That had been 15 years ago. Despite spending thousands on private investigators, despite following every possible lead, Harrison had never found his daughter. David Chapman had seemingly disappeared as well, taking with him any hope of locating Claire. Now, sitting in the gathering darkness, Harrison wondered if this boy held answers to questions he'd been asking for 15 years. The next morning, Harrison woke to shouting outside. He looked through his window and saw his entire crew gathered around the west pasture, pointing and talking in excited, disbelieving tones. He dressed quickly and headed outside to find Luke already at the fence. The black stallion was standing less than 5 feet away, his head lowered, his entire posture relaxed. The horse's eyes were locked on Luke with something that looked almost like recognition. "How long has this been going on?" Harrison asked his foreman. "Over an hour, boss. The kid just walked out here at dawn, and that devil horse came right up like he's been waiting his whole life for this boy to show up." Harrison approached slowly. "Luke, can I ask you something?" The boy glanced over. "Yes, sir. Did your father ever mention working at a ranch in Arizona? A place called Lanier?" Luke's eyes went wide. "You knew my dad?" "I did. He worked here for several months, long time back." Luke's face lit up. "He used to tell me stories about this place. About the Mustangs he trained and about," he stopped suddenly, uncertainty crossing his features. "About what?" Luke looked away. "About a girl he met here. Someone named Claire." Harrison's heart nearly stopped. What did he say about her? That she was the most beautiful person he'd ever known. That she understood horses the way he did. That he loved her but had to leave because her father wouldn't accept them together. The words cut through Harrison like a blade. Did he ever see her again? Harrison forced himself to ask. Luke nodded slowly. She found him in Nevada. They got married when she turned 18. He paused, then added quietly, "Claire was my mom." The world tilted. Harrison actually stumbled, catching himself against the fence. This wasn't just David Chapman's son standing in front of him. This was his grandson. Claire's child. Are you all right, Mr. Mitchell? Luke asked, concern filling his young voice. Harrison couldn't speak. 15 years of searching. 15 years of wondering if his daughter was even alive. And she'd been living in Nevada, married to David, raising a son. A son who was standing right here. Luke, Harrison managed to whisper, Claire was my daughter. You're my grandson. The boy's eyes went huge. But Mom never talked about her family. She said she didn't have anyone except Dad and me. The pain in those words was unbearable. Claire had chosen to erase her past completely, even denying Luke the knowledge that his grandfather existed. Harrison understood why. He'd driven her away with his anger and stubbornness, made her feel like she had no choice but to disappear entirely. Mrs. Lacey had joined them, tears streaming down her face. Oh Luke, this explains so much. What do you mean? Harrison asked. The boy has had nightmares since the accident. Not just about losing his parents, but about a ranch with horses. He kept saying he had to get back to the horses, that someone was waiting for him. His counselors thought it was trauma creating false memories. Harrison looked at Luke, who was staring at him with wonder and uncertainty. You remember this place? I've been dreaming about it, Luke admitted. But I thought they were just dreams. Did Mom and Dad bring me here when I was little? Harrison's throat constricted. I don't know. I never saw you. The implication hung heavy between them. Claire and David had brought their son to visit this ranch, had perhaps even walked this very ground, but had stayed hidden, never making contact. The thought of his daughter being that close without him knowing was almost too much to bear. A sharp whinny from the stallion broke the moment. The horse was pacing again, but this time his movement seemed urgent rather than aggressive. Something's wrong, Luke said, immediately turning his attention back to the horse. He's trying to tell us something. The stallion moved to his gate and began pawing the ground, his dark eyes fixed on the distant hills that bordered the northern edge of the ranch. I think he wants to go somewhere, Luke said. Harrison studied the horse's behavior. He'd been around animals long enough to recognize when one was trying to communicate. Get my ATV ready, Harrison called to his foreman. Boss, you can't be serious. That horse showed up here for a reason, Harrison said firmly. And Luke is the only one who can understand him. If that stallion wants to show us something, we need to follow. 20 minutes later, Harrison and Luke were heading across the desert terrain on the ATV, following the black stallion who moved ahead of them with clear purpose. The horse would stop periodically and look back, making sure they were still following, before continuing toward the rocky hills. Grandpa, Luke said softly, testing the word. Can I ask you something? Harrison's chest tightened at being called that for the first time. Anything. Why did Mom leave? Harrison struggled with how to answer. I made a terrible mistake, Luke. I was scared of losing your mother, and that fear turned into anger. I said things and did things that hurt both your parents badly. What kind of things? I thought your father wasn't good enough for your mother. I was wrong, but I couldn't see that then. I drove them away because I was too proud and too frightened to trust that your father truly loved her. Luke was quiet for a long moment. Dad used to say fear makes people do stupid things. Your father was a wise man. Do you think Mom would have forgiven you? If she'd lived? The question pierced Harrison's heart. I hope so. I've spent every single day of the last 15 years hoping I'd get the chance to find out. They followed the stallion deeper into the hills, along paths Harrison hadn't traveled in years. After nearly an hour, the horse stopped at the entrance to a narrow canyon Harrison recognized with a start. Devil's Canyon, a place he'd avoided for years because of its dangerous terrain. Why would he bring us here? Harrison muttered. Luke climbed off the ATV and approached the stallion. For the first time, he reached out and touched the horse's neck, running his small hand along the powerful muscles. He's not just showing us the way, Luke said quietly. He's taking us home. Home. Luke looked up at Harrison with eyes that seemed far older than 10. This is where Mom and Dad brought me. I remember now. There's a hidden valley in this canyon where wild horses come. Dad was documenting their behavior. Harrison's breath caught. You're certain? The boy nodded, his hand still resting on the stallion's neck. The last time we came here, I was about 7. Mom made Dad promise it would be our special secret. She said someday, when I was older, she might be ready to share it with someone else. The words hit Harrison like a physical blow. Claire had maintained this connection to the ranch, to the land where she'd grown up, even after cutting all ties with him. She'd been planning to eventually bridge the gap between her two worlds. The stallion began moving again, leading them deeper into the canyon along a path so narrow Harrison had to leave the ATV behind. They walked single file, Luke staying close to the horse, Harrison following behind, marveling at how this wild creature had become gentle as a lamb in his grandson's presence. The canyon walls rose higher around them, and Harrison could hear running water ahead. They rounded a bend and emerged into a hidden valley that took his breath away. The valley was perhaps 2 acres, surrounded by sheer rock walls but filled with lush grass and fed by a natural spring. Ancient cottonwood trees provided shade, and wildflowers bloomed along the water's edge. But it wasn't the natural beauty that made Harrison's knees buckle. It was the sight of a small cabin tucked beneath the largest tree, with a corral built nearby and clear signs of recent use. Mom and Dad built that, Luke said softly. We used to come here every summer. Harrison approached the cabin with trembling steps, noting the careful craftsmanship and the love that had obviously gone into its construction. Through the windows he could see simple furniture, books, personal belongings that spoke of a family's secret sanctuary. On the small porch, a wooden sign hung by the door. Harrison read the words aloud, "The Chapman Family Sanctuary, where wild hearts run free." There's something else, Luke said, leading Harrison around to the back of the cabin. Behind the structure, in a grove of aspens, 3 wooden crosses marked graves. 2 were larger, bearing the names David Chapman and Claire Mitchell Chapman, along with dates from the previous year. The third, smaller cross was unmarked but clearly prepared. Harrison sank to his knees beside his daughter's grave, 15 years of grief crashing over him. Claire had taken David's name but had also kept Mitchell, perhaps holding on to some connection to her family despite everything. They died in Nevada, Luke said quietly, sitting beside his grandfather. But Dad always said they wanted to be buried here if anything happened. In the place where they fell in love. How did they get here? Harrison asked through his tears. Mrs. Lacey helped me. She knew about this place because Mom had written about it in letters. After the funeral, we brought them here. Mrs. Lacey said it's what they would have wanted. Harrison looked at his grandson with new respect. At just 10 years old, Luke had managed to fulfill his parents' final wishes. The third grave? Harrison asked. Luke's expression grew sad. Dad always said this place was meant for 3 generations. He hoped that someday, if you ever forgave him, you might want to rest here too. The generosity of spirit in those words, after everything Harrison had done, was almost too much to bear. They sat in silence, listening to the wind in the aspens. The black stallion had moved to the stream to drink, and Harrison watched as several other wild horses emerged from the far end of the valley, mares with foals, a few younger stallions, all approaching the black horse with obvious deference. He's their lead stallion, Luke explained. This is his herd. When the Bureau of Land Management started another roundup last month, he led them here to safety. But he knew they needed help. Help with what? The spring is running low because of the drought. They need access to the stream on your ranch, but they were afraid to leave because of the helicopters and capture teams. Harrison understood now. The stallion hadn't been attacking his ranch. He'd been testing the boundaries, trying to figure out if it was safe to bring his herd down for water. When that failed, he'd somehow known to wait for Luke, the one human who could bridge the gap between wild and domestic, between past and present. What do you think we should do? Harrison asked his grandson. Luke stood and walked to the stallion, who lowered his magnificent head to the boy's level. They seemed to communicate without words. He wants to know if his family will be safe on your ranch, Luke said finally. If you'll protect them from the roundups and give them access to water. Harrison thought about his sprawling ranch, thousands of acres that could easily support a small herd. He thought about his daughter, who had loved these creatures with everything she had. Most of all, he thought about the grandson he'd just discovered, who had clearly inherited that same deep connection. Tell him yes, Harrison said. Tell him the ranch will always be a sanctuary for his herd. And tell him Luke will be here to help care for them. Luke's face lit up with joy as he turned back to the stallion, speaking in soft tones. The horse's response was immediate, a loud, trumpeting call that was answered by the entire herd. As the sun began to set, painting the canyon walls in gold and crimson, Harrison and Luke made their way back toward the ranch, accompanied by the stallion and his family. The horses moved with confidence now, trusting in the promise of sanctuary. Grandpa, Luke said as they walked, Mrs. Lacey has been trying to find a permanent home for me. She's getting too old to take care of a child full-time. Harrison's heart leaped. Would you like to stay here at the ranch? Could I help take care of the horses and learn about ranching? Luke, this ranch has been in our family for 4 generations. Someday, if you want it, it'll be yours. But more than that, I need you here. I've spent 15 years without family. I don't want to waste another single day. Over the following weeks, the transformation was remarkable. The wild horses thrived in their new environment. Luke proved to be a natural horseman with an intuitive understanding that amazed even the most experienced ranch hands. The black stallion, whom Luke named Shadow for his midnight coat, became the boy's constant companion. Together they developed a program for gentling wild mustangs that attracted attention from horse trainers across the country. 3 months after Luke's arrival, Harrison stood on his porch watching his grandson work with a young Mustang filly in the training corral. The boy's patience and skill were evident as he slowly built trust with the frightened animal. He's special, Mrs. Lacey said, joining Harrison with 2 cups of coffee. Just like his parents, Harrison replied. I see both David and Claire in him every day. Do you think he'll stay when he grows up? Or will he want to explore the world? Harrison considered. I think Luke will always be drawn to wild places and wild horses. But this ranch is his heritage. It's where his story began, even if he didn't know it. No matter where life takes him, he'll always come home. That evening, as they did every night, Harrison and Luke visited the hidden valley to check on the herd and spend time at the graves. Luke had started bringing wildflowers, and tonight he'd picked a bouquet of desert lupins. Mom always loved purple flowers, he said, arranging them carefully. So did your grandmother, Harrison replied. Claire inherited that from her. Luke looked up with interest. Tell me about Grandma. Harrison settled beside the graves. She was a lot like your mother. Strong-willed, passionate about horses, never afraid to speak her mind. She would have loved you tremendously. Do you think Mom and Dad are happy wherever they are? That they're together? Harrison looked at the peaceful valley, at the wild horses grazing by the stream, at his grandson's earnest face in the twilight. I think they're at peace, Luke. And I think they're proud of what you've accomplished here. As they prepared to leave, Shadow approached Luke for their nightly ritual. The stallion would lower his head, and Luke would whisper something in his ear. What do you tell him? Harrison asked as they walked back through the canyon. I tell him about my day, about things I learned, about my plans for tomorrow. And I thank him for bringing me home. He brought you home? Luke nodded seriously. Shadow knew exactly where to find me, Grandpa. Mrs. Lacey said he appeared at our house in Nevada the day after the accident, like he was waiting for me to be ready to come back here. I think Mom and Dad sent him to guide me home when I needed family the most. Harrison felt chills run down his spine. The sequence of events seemed too perfect to be coincidence. That night, Harrison sat at his desk writing letters, to officials about legal protection for the wild herd, to rescue organizations about expanding the ranch's sanctuary program, to his lawyer about updating his will to ensure Luke's inheritance. He also wrote a letter he'd been meaning to compose for 15 years. A letter to Claire and David, expressing his regret, his love, and his gratitude for the incredible gift of their son. He sealed it in an envelope addressed simply, "To my daughter and the man she loved," planning to read it aloud at their graves the next day. A year later, Lanier Ranch had become renowned as a premier wild horse sanctuary. Luke, now 11, had been featured in magazines and documentaries for his remarkable ability to communicate with wild mustangs. The ranch hosted school groups, researchers, and horse enthusiasts from around the world. Luke had become an eloquent spokesperson for wild horse protection, speaking with a maturity that reminded everyone of his parents' legacy. On the anniversary of his parents' death, Luke stood beside their graves with Harrison, Mrs. Lacey, and ranch hands who had become like family. He read a letter he'd written to his parents, telling them about his life, his growing skill with horses, and the grandfather who loved him unconditionally. "I want them to know I'm happy," Luke said when he finished. "That I'm exactly where I belong." Shadow stood nearby, as if understanding the solemnity of the moment. The stallion had become a legend, leading his herd to safety and serving as the foundation for a new generation of ranch horses that combined wild spirit with gentle temperament. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if Shadow hadn't appeared that day?" Harrison asked as they walked back. Luke considered seriously. "I think he would have found another way to bring me here. Some things are just meant to be, Grandpa. Mom used to say love always finds a way, even when it seems impossible." As the sun set over the ranch, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and purples, Harrison reflected on the truth of those words. Love had indeed found a way, through a wild stallion's journey, through a boy's courage, through the redemptive power of second chances. The ranch that had once been a place of loss and regret had become a sanctuary for both wild horses and wounded hearts. Luke had brought healing not just to Shadow's herd, but to his grandfather's spirit, proving that sometimes the greatest gifts come from the most unexpected places. If this story has moved you, share it with someone who believes in second chances and the healing power of family. Sometimes we all need to be reminded that it's never too late to come home, never too late to forgive, and never too late to love.